Welcome back to the Pirate Monk podcast. I'm very excited today. We have one of my favorite guests in the past. He has never disappointed. And if he disappoints today, then the disappointment shall be deep and wide.
No pressure, though. Absolutely no pressure.
Mike McHargue is here with us today. How are you doing, Mike?
Oh, man. Good. Good. Little sleepy, but good.
Now, you just moved from across the country to California, what, a month ago?
Like a month and a half, yeah.
And how I'll just ask right out. Are you enjoying California right now? It is not like the weather you would have been coming from, right?
I mean, the oppressive predictability of the weather is so tough to deal with. I mean, today, I just watched the news. It's going to be another sunny, breezy, 77-degree day with no humidity. And, you just start to long for some kind of seasonal variation. I'm lying. It's amazing.
I actually want to overdub the word politics in there so it can be the oppressive predictability of politics. And I watched the news today, and it will be
tell you
another miserable day
that
in
the politics are more predictable here than Tallahassee. But
wow,
nice. Well, since we last talked,
here it's like, are you liberal, or are you a socialist, or are you an anarcho-communist? Like, there's no question. It's a question of how far left you are, not if you're on the
left. It's funny. We started another little church 20 minutes over the hill from where we live, and on one side of the hill, 80% of the population voted for Donald Trump. On the other one, 80% for Hillary Clinton. And I never realized what a confusing thing it would be to give the exact same sermon from one week to the other to that big of a spread. Like, that really messed with my mind at first.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't realize the little comments you would make one way or the other that you're like, oh, nope, that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
So it was
definitely.
Good learning experience. So since we last talked, you have put out a book. When was this put out? Finding God in the Waves.
It 1 year ago today, actually.
really?
Today is the 1 year anniversary of Finding God in the Waves. The paperback comes out October the 3rd, which is a lower priced way to get the book and includes a group discussion guide in the back. We didn't realize it would be a book that people did like small group discussions around. That happened. So my publisher was cool and hired somebody to do a really great discussion guide. But yeah, it's been a year now, and it's been nuts.
Well, now, because I was unaware of this, we have brought a reader in. So Daniel, you actually have read the book.
I have actually listened to Mike read the book.
Oh, man.
Audio. Yeah.
That's unabridged. You got every word.
Yes. He bought it for me. Well, I guess it was no more than a year ago.
It was in February. Mom was in the hospital.
Yep. I was training for a race and going on a lot of long runs. So he bought it for me to listen to while I ran, and I just chewed through it. Well, you did.
So give us some of your thoughts or any questions, things that maybe he should fix before the paperback book comes out.
I think they've printed a lot already, but we'll see.
It's never too late.
I'll tell you how I knew the book had made an impact on Daniel. He came to care for his mom while I was speaking in Alaska. And when I came back, I found, and I didn't understand why it was there. It took me a while. Daniel had to explain it to me. He asked me whether I'd found the painting in my office. And Daniel had actually bought a copy of Starry Night for me, which now hangs on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And on the back of it, I wrote in Sharpie, "This is real." That was the part of the book that struck me the most.
I was going to say, I feel like this is a reference from the book, so I'm left out entirely of what's happening right now. So fill us in on the Starry Night.
Mike had gone through a brief history of Van Gogh's life, and how he had worked in a church and had kind of put the church, or put the poor in front of his needs, and it really didn't go over well with the church. And And then he talks later about how when Mike saw the painting that in all of this landscape, the lights of the church were out, and he just kind of painted it as what he saw, and then Mike said, now ask yourself, is Starry Night true? And as a way to reference or compare, I guess, the way that, I don't know, I should have.
Maybe let's put this into some little context. So
yes,
let me talk a little bit to the listeners about Daniel and me.
Yeah, I should probably.
So I was a pastor when Daniel was growing up. He was born when I was in seminary, and I was also an active sex addict. I've been in recovery now close to 20 years. Daniel is now 30.
See if you get this right.
6 years old.
Yes.
36 years old. He is no longer a church attender. No. And so his kind of, but has not lost an interest in spiritual things, but the pat answers of Christianity ring hollow.
Yeah. I found more comfort in uncertainty recently.
Okay.
You could say.
So he's been down that, and I've traveled kind of the side roads myself in faith. The recovery really redefined faith for me, enlivened it in new ways, while other ways just didn't seem to work anymore. So Mike's book, Finding God in the Ways, where Mike talks himself about, his journey, kind of resonated with us, and it started a helpful conversation that's still underway.
Yeah. And one of my bigger problems with the faith that I'd grown up with, was the Bible and how it was supposed. A lot of the the literal interpretations applied today, and to go back to the painting of Starry Night, he kind of describes the Bible as, and if I'm taking liberties here, let me know.
I love this.
It describes the Bible as a work of art of people who are trying to paint an image of their God with their words, and in the same way that you can't judge the truthfulness of Van Gogh's vision in Starry Night, to argue literal truth in the Bible is to miss the point. And that helped me reconcile with a lot of problems that I had kind of stumbled into through my childhood and young adult life.
Yeah.
So
I've seen over and over that, in my own life first, the way that so many American Protestants, or Western Protestants really, end up having a faith crisis that hinges primarily on the way they read the Bible. And because of how we structure our relationship and study of the Bible in the church, people aren't aware that there's any other interpretive lens for the Bible. So instead of saying, I might have a problem with how I'm interpreting this work, people instead go to, there's a problem with the Bible itself. And if you listen online to the always reasonable debates between Christians and skeptics,
especially in the comments section,
you'll see this energy where they are debating the Bible, but from the same interpretive reference frame, and therefore ignoring the vast majority of Christian breadth and depth and scholarship relating to the Bible. And
this, can I take from there a little turn? We could talk more about your book, which would be good for promotional reasons, but it's been out a year, so there is no obligation for this. We can get into the real stuff.
I'm into whatever.
Okay. I'm less interested in having conversations, because conversations are getting annoying, as far as people's just dichotomy, which team are you on, and then just there's no conversation, and it's getting annoying. So I am having more fun having conversations about conversations.
Oh, so we'll go real meta.
Exactly. And something that a guy at church turned me on to was the Brain and Creativity Institute at USC with their Backfire Effect study.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get your thoughts on it. So let me just lay out what I understand, and then you can fix it because you're good at making things take strange turns.
Okay.
So USC does a study where they're putting people in the MRI, scanning their brains while asking them or talking about different areas of belief and seeing what happens in the brain. When is it flexible? When is it not flexible? And what changes in the brain when your beliefs are not flexible. So what they found were there were some core ideas that the brain responded differently when you were challenged, mostly revolving around politics and religion, like the two big ones. And I guess the most simplistic way to explain it, and you can fix this, is that when a person was confronted with information that contradicted some core belief, all of a sudden there was way increased activity in the amygdala where it was like, oh, I'm facing something that is actually physically threatening. And so they would start to not think, but fight to protect that idea. And the better the information was coming at them, the more reasonable, the more they would fight against it. So as I was reading this and different articles and people writing about it, I thought this is every conversation about politics where you watch two people facing each other and words are coming out of each other's mouths, but they are not talking.
Mm-hmm.
They are just now defending something that somehow their brain at neurological level is desperate to protect. So I have some questions about that, but correct what I just said and make it better.
No, I think you nailed it. The backfire effect is one of dozens of documented cognitive biases in Homo sapiens, and a nasty one. Its name comes from how an attempt to persuade someone backfires. And when you said certain beliefs trigger the backfire effect more, it is beliefs that you have a deeper emotional investment in, which is typically concepts that come down to your identity or your social grouping.
Yes.
So your religious beliefs become a keystone or a cornerstone in your community formation, and your political beliefs do as well. We are at a unique period in modern American history, and the degree to which social connections are starting to mirror political affiliation. That started in the Congress is now spreading to the public. And it's just as you said, once your amygdala is active, you no longer have the energy budget in your brain to keep the analytical parts of your mind functioning. So in a high state of amygdala activation, you're pretty much unable to learn, at least conceptually. You could still learn in terms of physical conditioning, right? Ouch, that shocked me. But you're not going to learn in sort of a linguistic manner.
So it's interesting. You're talking about the social connection. So if I believe something, I believe it because I think it's true at an informational level, at a reality level.
Yeah, but let's not miss this social. I have a quick question. Does this research seem to imply that we are by nature tribal?
Oh, absolutely. We're an incredibly tribal species. And you're seeing a new tribalism set in, basically a balkanization of the previous Pan-American identity,
right,
is now splintering into smaller social groupings with, fundamentally incompatible views of reality. And I would say based on my understanding of cognitive neuroscience, we don't hold beliefs because we think they're true. We don't hold beliefs because we've assembled a certain amount of evidence that supports them. Our natural inclination is to believe the things that people that hold our social identity believe.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, I think that's true, but I don't think many people admit to that.
Oh, no one admits to it.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's where I don't care if it's somebody arguing for what a Bible verse means or saying that I'm an atheist, so I don't have any faith. You confront either of those, and I'm going to stick with it, not because of the veracity of the information, but because if I change my mind, it will destroy my entire social structure.
Bingo. Yeah.
If I all of a sudden think that homosexuality isn't central to a person's faith, well, then what will the people in my church think? Will I have to go to a gay disco and I don't want to? Like, what are those implications of new information? And just admitting that, like, this has been a big deal for me, admitting that I hold on to many truths based on social fabric, not information or truth of information, I think is a very humbling thing.
Yeah. Well, and some people might go, well, I don't do that. I never agree with my tribe's view on something, and like start to pat themselves on the back. And it's like, no, you're a nonconformist.
That's your function within the tribe.
You form your beliefs in opposition to the tribe, but that doesn't mean they're like original thoughts based on evidence. It just means that's your wiring.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so let's talk about this. If it's this, this makes it very frustrating to be in good conversations with people when you know this is how we're all going to be acting. So it's a strange little drama that's being played out. First, some people seem that they can overcome this a little easier than others. I'm curious as to the why is that. What's going on with people that are more flexible with core ideas? And two, can everybody get better at this, or is it just the way it is?
So we have a system and a methodology for checking and pushing back on cognitive biases. Several. One's called logic. One's called philosophy. One's called science. These rigorous manners of thinking are designed to give you the tools to interrogate your own narrative and to publish your thoughts in a way that invites other people who don't have your same blind spots because they're not you to interrogate your thinking as well. And the process of becoming educated and informed scientifically, logically, or philosophically creates a feedback loop wherein you are not so harshly penalized for being wrong.
Right.
That's just part of the process. And it becomes like you become desensitized to the fear of being incorrect. And then you take someone like me, I feel like I've been fundamentally incorrect about the nature of ultimate reality twice in a row. So I start to hold my ideas more loosely. I start to become less obsessed with and in love with the way I describe the world and more interested in exploring the world itself. And I think anyone can learn that. I would say the more, like if you're a believer, the more biased you are toward like a prefrontal activation when you contemplate God, probably the easier it is to become a flexible with ideas person.
Okay, explain that with different words.
Sure.
The more prone you are to
the more, yeah, the front part of the brain right behind your forehead is the prefrontal cortex. It's the seat of analytical reasoning and your executive agency. And when some people are just more prone to think with that part of the brain. These people tend to be drawn in religious context to theology more than experiential worship. And don't get me wrong, they can back themselves into a cognitive corner quite effectively. But in general, that sort of inclination makes it easier for you to develop the discipline of holding your ideas more loosely.
Yeah.
How does that all fit into what we now have of a world of alternative facts, where
Oh man,
it's
yeah, that's a problem. I don't know that. I mean, I can like riff with my opinion. I don't know that anyone knows the solution or how deep the rabbit hole goes in
Mhm.
this age of alternative facts and media bubbles. I mean, the Flat Earth Society is growing.
Unbelievable.
There's a serious movement of people who assert that a spherical Earth is a government conspiracy. That's some serious alternative facts, right? Like, all we need to do is position people at a few different spots on the Earth's surface, have them point a camera directly up at night and take a picture of the constellations and compare those constellations, and you will get a difference in the sky that can only and exclusively be described by a round Earth, right? A dome over a flat Earth wouldn't create that different set
Mike,
of
I feel like
constellations.
you're trying to convince us here.
So
and,
no,
you know,
well, here's why. Here's why. So when I say that, flat earthers get the backfire effect,
right.
Mhm.
right? And so when we're dealing with alternative facts, the kind of dialogue we would attempt, which is based on evidence, is impossible. Luckily, there's a better approach. Fact-based reasoning is pretty evolutionarily speaking, very new.
Mhm.
It's not an old feature of the brain. It's not a very old feature of human culture. About as long as we've been able to vocalize and use language, there has been a far more powerful way to convince human beings to hold different ideas, and that's with
Root for.
story.
Oh,
Mhm.
darn.
Right.
I
Story.
thought it was violence. I was so
Vi-
excited.
Vi-
There was a time in history.
Violence is a good way to get people to stop talking, assuming you're the most powerful. But story bypasses so many of these cognitive defense mechanisms. So if pick issue X, if we're talking about the death penalty, that's something people have very deep perspectives on. If you were trying to convince someone that the death penalty is a good thing, you might tell the story of a family who their children died because someone killed them, who was unrepentant, who
Mhm.
then spent X number of years in prison, got out of the system, and then killed again, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are facts in that story, but if I just present them as statistics, people go, whoa, backfire. If you tell an engaging story, our consciousness is based on story. We
Mhm.
are a protagonist in a story our brain tells itself. And so when you tell a story, you actually shift someone's perspective into another person's consciousness, even if the person is fictional. And then on the other hand, if I wanted to tell, if I wanted to convince you that the death penalty is immoral, I would tell you the story about someone who was wrongfully convicted and executed, who was
Right.
a good father, who whatever you value as a good person in society, I would make sure I found a person that mirrored that, and then I would tell a story about injustice that occurred with the death penalty. And in both of those situations, you could speak to a group with opposed ideas, and if you told the story artfully and emotively, they would engage in the facts presented within it. And so I don't spend a lot the way I work. If you hear me talking facts and figures and conversing, I'm either talking to people who've done the relatively difficult work of becoming more flexible with their ideas, or I'm preaching to the choir. I'm giving
Right.
them language to understand where they are. If I'm trying to persuade someone across the aisle, so to speak, that's when you hear me tell stories. And I've practiced storytelling as a discipline so intentionally for that reason. It just actually works.
Which, yeah, which is kind of a beautiful thing, since God built that into us, and then he gave us a story
Yes,
through which to reveal himself.
absolutely.
Which would be
But
the
when-
only way for the only vehicle for the infinite to come into this anthropomorphic idea.
And when we read the Bible as an encyclopedia rather than a storybook, we misread it.
Well, I think there's parts of the Bible that the authors intended to be an ancient analog to an encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
I think Numbers was probably meant to be
Yeah.
encyclopedic in nature. I think the Bible contains a lot of different kinds of documents that should be read differently. And that means you do the Bible a little bit of a disservice if all you ever do is take it off the shelf and read it alone without reading any scholarship about the Bible. Now, I'm not saying we elevate scholarship to the same level we elevate Scripture, but it does help us better interpret who the author of a given work in the Bible was, who the audience they were speaking to was, and what agenda they had for that audience as they wrote those words. And that can open up the Bible's contents in a way that makes it more relevant, less likely for us to take individual verses and then beat people over the head with them. And that happens from all theological perspectives, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just I don't cite many individual verses anymore. I tend to cite meta narratives that arc across at least a chapter, hopefully across the entire book of the Bible. Because it's so rare to have like one verse come out and speak in a way that is appropriate to what the author was saying, that resonates with 21st century Americans, for example.
So a lot of this, to me, I mean, this can be used as a tool by which to better convince other people, or it can be a tool to discover my own biases and look at that reflection. Quick book recommendation. Royce Grunler wrote a book called Meaning and Understanding, which has been out of print for a long time, but I found it free in a PDF form on the internet, and it is kind of a hermeneutic, how to interpret the Bible book, except it goes through the Enlightenment and then early American shifts in philosophy and thinking, and shows our biases. Shows how, I default to a way of thinking which flowed out of this way of thinking. And I found it really helpful to go,
Amazing.
Maybe I can hold this more loosely because that guy gave it to me, not God gave it to me.
Right.
But now back to the backfire effect is the first step in understanding my own bias to recognize when I am having that reaction.
Yeah, I mean, a certain mindfulness can help. I actually think in dealing with cognitive biases, community is more important than your individual thought process.
Wow, how does that work?
You can't see all your blind spots effectively. Others see them more easily in you. And the people I'm closest with come from, believe it or not, a pretty theologically, ideologically, and politically diverse spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
What they all share in common is the flexibility. They start with the assumption, I could be wrong about this.
Yes.
And when you have 4 or 5 people like that in your life you talk to regularly and deeply, they help you uncover your blind spots. I think if someone who didn't know me and my friends well, in fact, occasionally happens on the podcast, we start talking about something and then people start sending in letters like, are you angry at each other? Is the show going to keep going? It's like, no, we're interrogating ideas. We drink beer after that. Like that's it's, there's no animosity involved in interrogating ideas. And I think the communal aspect comes first, and then the internal disciplines come next. I think that's why academics have an academy, why it happens in university settings. If you try to do this all on your own, you might estimate yourself as having made more progress in confronting your biases than you actually have.
There you go. Good. It comes back to community and honesty.
Yeah.
And humility to believe that we might be wrong.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, I mean, we're at, people ask me, like, what do you believe? And I'm like, you mean like I have absolute confidence in? If someone would say yes, I would say nothing. Like, I'm basically a nihilist.
Yeah.
And then I just have this pragmatism wherein there's some ideas I hold loosely enough to operate, right? Like, I've always said the ultimate answer to nihilism is a city bus. Just like let it get up to 30 miles an hour, step out in the road and say, you don't exist. And you know what I mean? Your nihilism will end very quickly.
Yeah.
Either because of your survival reflex or when the bus strikes you. So, I think, but I've never felt so close to God. I've never existed so easily within community as I have since I decided I don't know anything at all. And it really, that phrase, like, and I'm doing what I said people should never do, but that phrase, faith like a child, resonates with me more today than it ever has.
Yeah. I was going to say, if I can translate what you're saying for people that it would scare, the I don't know anything, well, then that's a problem, because you're supposed to know these certain things. Then here's my list of essentials. I think faith like a child is that which I can know, and that which God gave for me to know is always woefully incomplete, because if I expand it to the infinite of what it means to God, what he sees it as, what I see is at best a tiny piece of the truth, which is wonderful. It's great to have a little tiny glimpse, and God celebrates that as well, because he gave it to me to be known. But it is always the finite version of an infinite thing. And so I accept that as being small.
Well, and children's belief is predicated on love and trust, not on empirical inquiry. Insert philosophy here, right?
Yeah, right.
So my theological framework, the things I would say about God, the Spirit, Christ, the Christian tradition, the Bible, these are based on love for and trust in God.
And believing that that's being reciprocated.
Yes.
So, say, Mike, if I can switch just a little bit, I'm interested in hearing what the kind of interaction that you've had with audiences at readings and lectures in the years since the book came out. I just saw yesterday the summary of a Pew Foundation religious trends survey that showed that the de-churching of America is accelerating, and not solely among millennials. In fact, it's among older Americans. It seems to be the drop seems to be almost as precipitous. I don't know how much that is connected to the proliferation of story in modern culture, how much the balkanization of our culture as we get to choose our social groups through social networks, and we get to create our own news bubble, all that. I don't know what's going on. What are you hearing as you talk with people around the country since Finding God in the Waves hit the bookshelves?
Gosh, I've probably done 120 events since the book came out. Some of those were real big rooms. I mean, that's my audience. The de-churched and post-church are who engages with my work.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to a few major segments. One is the Bible fell apart for me crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Two is spiritual mentors deeply and profoundly failed morally.
Yes.
That could be abuse, that could be infidelity, that could be scandal. That's a big, big, big segment of people who are leaving church behind. And then there's people for whom the way the church approaches justice issues made them feel disgusted. That could be racism, that could be LGBTQ, that could be any number of things. For a while, statistically, the best predictor that someone was going to leave a church was that they accepted the theory of evolution and their church did not. That actually was a stronger predictor for someone having a faith transition than they accepted LGBT marriage and their church did not, believe it or not. So that's kind of this coalition. And then for a lot of people, it's a mix of those things.
Yeah.
The church, in the eyes of culture, lost its moral authority. And so people are leaving, but they're not finding something else. So what I'm discovering in my work is people leave church and become lonelier. Their community and social circles shrink. And so, a big part of when I come to town, a bunch of people come to a church. I typically do events in churches. Not always, but 70% of the time. People come to a church that haven't been there in years, absolute years, and they come and they have an experience and it's not traumatizing. And it like provokes a craving or a hunger they didn't know they had.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's hopeless for the church. But I think the church will continue to die until it learns how to prioritize. The like alliance between Christian leadership and political power is a bad one.
Oh yeah.
The primary metric by which we judge our success being cultural battles is a bad strategy. The more the church engages in the least of these kind of work and ministry, the more I think you'll see people return. And I think, people don't like to change. Institutions like to change even less. I think it just has to get so bad that every church is afraid they'll shut down before you'll see large scale systemic reform in the church.
As somebody who has actually stepped away from my faith, what caused me to step away from it was more of I didn't walk away from the church per se as what happened. Well, a very close friend of mine died very suddenly, and I had almost an existential crisis of just, I remember pacing the sidewalk around our apartment complex and imagining that the sidewalk was life and what I knew, and the grass beyond was what I didn't know. And I had almost a panic attack standing on the sidewalk, imagining myself stepping onto the grass because I realized that I had no idea what moved beyond. And I tried to jump into my Bible and I talked to some of my Christian friends, and I found no relief there for me. And that's when I began to let go of things and realize that what I thought I knew, I didn't know. And I've kind of had to just start from scratch. But the problems with the church are what have kind of kept me from going back, because I have children now, and I don't want to bring my kid into a situation where he is told that a gay person is going to hell, or it's a lot of, you're saying the social issues of things like that have I want to be very mindful of what I teach my children, and a lot of the things that I grew up with in the church personally. And again, I'm speaking as somebody who has stepped away from faith. I don't want to pass on. That's what I loved about your book was when I finished your book, what I wanted was a community. And I realized that that's what I had been missing. And my wife and I have joked about starting a non-religious church based on the philosophy of just don't be a dick.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just be nice to each other, you know? And so that's kind of what's kept us at bay.
I find it interesting that both what you're saying, Mike, and what you're saying, Daniel, what people have left the church over has nothing to do with church according to Scripture. And what you're talking about, hungering for community,
yes,
all the church was like. So I don't. You said a large scale return. I feel like the church has to die at its large scale control model so that it can be reborn in a community model where people aren't getting paid. They're just meeting in living rooms. They're the D-bad churches. Don't be a dick. Yeah, D-bad churches.
I never put that. Okay.
The coalition of D-bad. And that's why it doesn't bother or scare me to see the decline. The decline in the institutional church is not a decline in faith necessarily, although it probably does represent some of that. I think it's a hunger for something that's more real and more community. So it's kind of exciting hearing both of what you're saying, because all of it forces real.
Yeah.
Well, I find it ironic, Mr. Mike, that you are now becoming this pastor of the disenfranchised. Yeah, I know, right? That hurt a little bit. Stings. You and Nate both disqualified yourselves to be initiated into the qualities that were necessary. So we've got sex addiction being the necessary inroad to be the pastor you were always supposed to be, and atheism being the inroad to be the pastor you were always supposed to be. Ha ha to both of you. I'm just playing.
I was at a pretty soon after the book came out doing one of my live podcasts, and the people who were hosting me came up and said, I don't know what to call Mike. I guess he's kind of a freelance internet pastor. And I was really offended, and then I laughed.
Yeah.
You're just a mercenary pastor. That's all.
So what's the name of the podcast? How can our listeners subscribe, Mike?
There's two. There's the Liturgist podcast, which you can go find at theliturgist.com or search any place where podcasts are found. That's a topical show with an audience in the millions, where we take an issue and look at it through the lenses of science, art, and faith. And then I host by myself a show called Ask Science Mike. That's a weekly question and answer program with an audience in the hundreds of thousands. And you can send questions in via AskScienceMike.com.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time this morning. I love getting to throw these ideas out and see what pops out of you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Nice. Well, we will be right back to wrap things up on the Pirate Monk podcast.